And here we are doing another podcast.
Hey, welcome to Business Velocity through the 5 Facets of Business podcast, where your journey to accelerated success begins. We're your hosts, Dave Newell, Hannah Panuski. Where in each episode, we dive deep into the 5 facets of business through conversations with business leaders, owners, wonderful people. Whether you're a startup or a seasoned business leader, understanding how to harness these facets can transform your operations and propel your growth. With our guests, we explore actionable insights and share stories of real businesses that have achieved remarkable results. Let's unlock the potential of your business together and achieve business velocity. Now I'm going to kick it over to Hannah. You can introduce our guests, our lovely guests today.
I would love to. Yes. Yes, our lovely guest today, we have Ellen Ruiters with us. I'm going to bring her into the stage with us here. There she is. Hi, Ellen.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me here. It's good to be here.
Yeah.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Ellen is described, I love this when I read her bio that she sent over. Ellen is described as a sledgehammer to a glass ceiling, breaking through barriers and limitations, opening new paths for unprecedented success. Yet the rhythm and joy of dancing in Africa, her favorite pastime, equally captures the essence of her approach. Dynamic, engaged, and harmoniously in tune with the teams she serves. With over 23 years of global experience in leadership, fundraising, and organizational development, she has led diverse teams, founded a pioneering organization in South Africa. Definitely want to hear about that. And her efforts have helped secure over $1 billion in fundraising and fostered significant growth across various sectors. Her blend of strength and grace defines her professional journey and personal ethos. What an introduction.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
My goodness, I love that bio. But Ellen, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about how you and Dave met and also kind of how you got into the work that you do now.
Yeah. Well, Dave and I have known each other for quite a long time. We've actually traveled to South Africa and co-led a class of college students, which, I hope that comes up because that was a blast and lots of stories in itself. But cool. How I got into this, when I was a kid, I loved to dance, and every dancer wants to have an audience and participants. So I would take my 1980s boombox, and I had a cassette of Michael Jackson, and I went to my neighbors, would ring the doorbell and say, "Do you want to dance?" And it was amazing until summer started winding down, and I started kind of thinking about, oh my gosh, what are kids at school going to think of me? And that was the last time I did it. Mm-hmm. Fast forward to 7 years after apartheid ended in South Africa, I found myself leading an incredibly diverse team, but also very culturally divided. Mm. And you know what? It needed that confidence of that little girl, kind of that badass that's like, I am going to put myself out there, because leadership's hard, right? I mean, it's vulnerable and you're doing something that other people aren't doing. Mm-hmm. And your team has to join you. They have to rise above their differences, and they have to know that you care about them, mm-hmm. and that they care about one another. And at the end of the day, if you cannot communicate your value, it does not matter if you have the best idea, the best product, the best vision. It'll just be noise. It won't be music other people can't dance to if you can't communicate it so other people can join you. So really, it's kind of what I think about. I think that's how I got started in this. And that's really how I think about consulting. It's multifaceted, but also it's leadership and it's teams and it's messaging that kind of all come together.
Yeah. I love that. Do You Want to Dance? I think would be, first of all, just an awesome reality show. I would imagine that's a thing you could do now, where you just bring your 80s boombox, go door to door in your neighborhood and record it. I think people would watch that. I think people would totally love that. But I love that you use the metaphor of dancing, because so much of what happens in organizations is a dance. Mm-hmm. Right? And there's almost always somebody who's quote unquote kind of leading the dance, and you're supposed to follow a little bit, but you can add a little flair, you can add a little style, every once in a while you can flip your partner over, whatever it is, right? Like, there's a lot of different ways to dance, mm-hmm. but it is we have to read each other. We have to understand what's going on. There has to be music. There has to be this thing that we're all, kind of synced up to, so to speak. So like when you work with leaders, I know you've done tremendous work in fundraising spaces, but you've also done a lot of work with leadership teams and trust building and storytelling and navigating. Like, how do you get a team to unify? Like, how do you get a team to be dancing to the same song, right?
Yeah.
If they're all kind of dancing to their own music, so to speak. Maybe I'm taking the metaphor too far at this point, but how do you get them to, dance to the same song?
We make a lot of assumptions that people really know where we're going. And articulating where we are going, very clearly setting the vision and kind of the expectations, and having empathy to even say, this might be hard, right? We're going to have to work really hard at this. And that ability for leadership to be strong, but to have empathy builds trust. Those two things together build trust. And in that, people can kind of bring their own unique ideas without fear of, oh my gosh, what if this is a really bad idea? I'm not going to say anything. And so you create teams where I'm free to have an idea, and I'm free to speak about it, and other people to kind of say, like, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, right? Isn't that kind of what we all want? That I'm going to assume that you have good intentions. And those teams have an ability to say, we can't do this individually. We have to do it collectively. And we're doing something that none of us could do on our own individually. So I think part of it is, are we really defined in where we're going? Do we know what it's going to take? And do we have empathy for one another in a way that says, bring your ideas without fear of failure, because we're going to need all of everyone in order to get this job done. Those teams, my experience is they far exceed. I mean, they're the ones who are breaking barriers.
Yeah, absolutely. One, I do really love following this metaphor of dance because music is the universal language. And even when you have a vision, I do find that sometimes like leaders will say the vision, they'll say it, but it's not quite communicating. It's not quite passing over to the other ears. And like if you kind of follow just again the dance metaphor, like maybe there is a universal language element to dance and something we can bring in more with our clients that can help them understand, like, yeah, you might have a vision, but the way you're communicating it, people aren't hearing it. It's not landing. So let's figure out like what is that universal language for your team and for your company, especially if the company's big. I mean, especially if people are spread out over, countries, like time zones. You really have to take all that into account when you're trying to communicate where you want the company to go.
And I think people don't really understand like how, right? So you're telling me what to do, what I'm supposed to believe in. And it's very like, here's what we're doing, but it's not tangible. It's not accessible. I talk about it as behaviors that are going to get you to your goal, but they have to be observable and measurable. People have to recognize them, and leadership has to reward it. And I think if you can define it and measure it, so it is, I'm seeing you do this behavior that we've kind of said, this is how we're going to get there, right? I'm observing that you're doing it over and over again. Our clients are recognizing it. We don't have to say our core values because our clients could tell you what they are because we're behaving this way. And leadership says, you're doing what we asked you to do, and now we are going to reward you. That I think is kind of that combination of it's vision, but then it's also like tangible and touchable, and I can do something with it.
Yeah. Well, and dancing well takes practice, right? Like it's not like
totally.
So Ellen mentioned that we met in South Africa or worked together in South Africa. I mean, just an amazing experience. And one of the first things you do is you go into, one of the townships, and, these kids from, Kailicha, one of the communities that we were in, have this camp, and they come in and it's like, they are just beating on drums, and they're all talented from like the 4-year-old to the 20-year-old, and my Minnesota Methodist dance skills, pale in comparison to like how just like gifted and fluid and like amazing these kids are, you know. And it's like they kind of show you this spirit of what it can look like to dance, right? But it's like it's part of the culture. It's just kind of how they move and how they act and how they interact with each other. And you can feel yourself being like, I want to be part of that culture. Like, I don't know how to do it, but I want to be part of it. And I think it, you know, it highlights two things. It's like when you have a culture that's effective, where the story is clear, where behaviors are rewarded, it's measurable, objectable, people want to be a part of that story because it's clean, it's clear, it's seeable, and it takes a lot of work, right? So what do you know, how do you help people? How do you guide people through the work of building a culture?
Yeah. Well, culture to me is actionable core values. I mean, I think your values of your company are why your company exists. So who are you? And like, why do you exist in this world? Those are your values. And your values aren't something that's on a piece of paper. Dave, we've talked about this before, that, you know, if your values are only a piece of paper, they're actually nothing. They're actions. Like, how do I live those out? Right. So in South Africa, building community was one of our values. You did not need to see it on a website. You felt it. You could experience it. When you walked into a room, kids walked up to you and said, "Join me." I mean, it was built into, and in companies, is what are those behaviors? Is it collaboration? You know, we're collaborative. How are you thinking about how you do that with your colleagues? How does your boss collaborate with you? How do you collaborate with your clients to the point where they can recognize, oh, you know what? Everyone that I've worked with in this organization has been very collaborative. Like, that's what we want. And I think the other aspect to this is, I just got done doing a whole 30 sessions with coaching sessions with a company, and looking at values, but how do you as an individual show up in those? Not trying to put on the company values and be like, no, I'm going to go act like this because I'm at work. But how do you say, how does Ellen show up and be collaborative? What is it that feels like me that I can tell my leadership, look for me showing up in collaboration this way, you know, pausing and asking other team members, what's your opinion? Right? So it's observable, it's measurable. People can see it. Oh, this is how Ellen is showing up with our core values. So it's not, oh, and I think when people do that, they feel like they belong. They're like, I just belong here. Like, this company gets me.
Well, yeah, because so often if someone's not showing up in the way that you show up, you think they aren't showing up at all. You tell yourself that story, and it's the farthest thing from the truth. Everybody shows up differently.
And then it's really on leadership. You know, these things, if you say they're important, can you define how you are going to measure them? And if you're going to measure them, you have to reward them. You know, otherwise it's just like, oh, here's another thing I have to do. Versus, this is what I get to do. This is how I am successful. Tell me what you want me to do in order to be successful. Define success for me. Help me figure out how I'm going to get there. And tell me when you see it. There's the track team at Minnehaha Academy, the Chris Sauer was the track coach. And my favorite story was, there's a young woman in the summer and she's running down the river road. She's getting ready for track season, and not the best runner on the team, but she was out there in the summer. Chris Sauer, the track coach, happened to see her and slowed down his car, rolled down his window and said, "Sarah, I see you working." Her graduation speech was that was the most impactful thing that happened to her in her high school career. And that doesn't change when you grow up and go to work.
Yeah.
Dave, I see you working. And I think we forget that, and to be able to bring that to teams, to bring that to leadership, everyone feels better. People feel valued and you feel like you belong.
Yeah. Well, there's something to be said too about the organic and genuineness of that, of the story you just gave, right? It wasn't like I said it at the end of the year speech because I'm supposed to thank people at the end of the year speech, or it wasn't like a pre-programmed, perfunctory exercise to say, I see you, right? It was in the moment, organic, actually paying attention to and looking for those things and then saying something.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I think there is something about the genuineness. One of the things we do with organizations, we create core values and then we create behaviors for those values. And exactly what you're saying, like what we're asking for is, how do we know? Like we say teamwork or we say take ownership, but like, what does that look like? Like, how do I know I'm doing it? Right. And so you mentioned, you want people to be able to live in it. You want to be able to define those. You want to be able to clearly kind of state and define those so that folks can see it. And then I think there's an invitation portion, right? Which is like, I want to invite you into it and I want to encourage you and see you, etc. So I love that story. And I want to maybe pivot just a little bit. I think we can kind of stay on the same track a little bit, but you are such a gifted storyteller. You weave story into most of the things. Like every time we talk, I'm just kind of engaged in what you're saying, right? Like you bring in all this narrative and these stories. And I want to just talk briefly about kind of what's the role of storytelling from a culture perspective, but what's the role of storytelling in organizations, generally speaking? Maybe just kind of kick us off in that direction.
Yeah, well, story is universal. We think in story, children think in story. It's very, very basic. And there's brain science behind it that says, when you tell a compelling story, dopamine is released. People get excited. Different parts of their brain start lighting up. And so you're capturing people's attention, but you're helping them move towards a goal. We talk about problem, solution, outcome. We're moving towards that outcome. Where are we going? When I lived in South Africa and I fell in love with the community and I put a camp on a credit card. I was like, I'm going to be back in a year with 200 kids. Here's my credit card. And then being young and naive, I was like, oh my goodness, like I can't actually have this on my credit card. Like I need to go raise money. Mm-hmm. I had to find a way to articulate what was happening so people could see it in their mind and want to be a part of it.
Totally.
And that happens through story. Mm-hmm. Story takes big, huge concepts and can bring it down to an individual level that you can do something about, right? Metrics and numbers, and those have a place, but how is it going to impact and motivate an individual? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Fundraising, asking for someone for money is, do you see yourself in this bigger story? Mm-hmm. But can you care about one child? About your, I think that's the power of story. It's moving people towards something that's better, that's more powerful, that allows them to see it on a very basic level.
Yeah.
And then you can define what people are supposed to do with it. If story is beginning, middle, and end. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes we walk into a room and we say, okay, here's what we need to do. Da 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 da. Yeah. Why? It's like the little kid, like Dave, like you and I have, little kids. The questions, why?
Right.
We're hardwired for it. Story answers, because we're here and we're gonna get here. And this is what better looks like. This is what it feels like. This is why we're doing this hard work.
Right. Yeah. You given the context, and you actually used the phrase earlier, like, can they see themselves in the story? We do some work with consultant. He uses this metaphor And I think, you know, it works for the older generations. I don't know if it works so much for kind of the Instagram, you know, TikTok, all the social media folks now, because you can see people's photos all the time. But back in my day, we used to like, my grandparents would go on vacation and then they would take us through a slideshow of their trip, right? And this would be like a slideshow that's like an hour long. And by the fifth photo, what's your experience? It's, okay, cool. I'm glad you had a really good trip, but like, I am not in any of these photos. And so pretty soon you can't see yourself in the story, and the story gets boring, even though I care about those people.
Yeah.
Right? Like, even though I care about you and that you had a good time, if I don't see myself in the story, fine, cool, interesting story, but I'm not like as energized, I'm not as connected, it's not as meaningful. Like, I have to be able to see myself in the story.
Yeah.
So you alluded to that earlier of like, it's not just telling a story to tell a story, it's telling a story to say, hey, and you're a part of it. Like, you can be in this story. I want you to see yourself as part of that story.
Yeah.
And I think that part's really profound. That's part of what makes it persuasive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
People will do harder things. You know, we were in Europe 2 summers ago. Our flight was canceled and we had to drive from Switzerland to Norway, which is a really long drive. And we had to get there is because Maya, my teenager, was in a soccer tournament in the Norway Cup, and it was the opening ceremonies. And we had worked so hard to get her team to Norway, but we were stuck in Switzerland. And we rented a car and said, okay, you guys, we have to get Maya. We want her to be at the opening ceremonies. This was like her last soccer tournament. They made it to Norway. So we are going to drive for 28 hours straight.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to stop in Germany, but we're going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone participated. The kids are in the back. They weren't obnoxious. They didn't fight. They knew where we were going. They knew this part of it was going to be hard. Very different than if we just said, hey, everyone get in the car and let's go drive for 28 hours.
Right.
Where are we going?
Yeah. When are we going to get there?
Yes. How much longer?
Yeah.
And so I think the story says, like, this is where we're going. This is why we're doing it. And this is how it's going to benefit you, because you're going to feel awesome that we made it. You get to watch Maya walk in an international soccer tournament.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would be curious to know from both of you, you know, I don't know necessarily that I have come across this many times, but I've definitely heard a lot of people talk about these kind of situations where you're working with a small business or a newer business, and really the main story is to sell the product, or what they think is the main story is to just sell the product, to just make money.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you encourage maybe, newer businesses or businesses that are kind of stuck in that mindset? They're like, oh yeah, the story is we need to like make a profit. How would you encourage them to start cultivating that deeper meaning story?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Dave said is you put yourself in who's your audience, right? Who's the end user, and how are you making their life better? You know, if you think about like why you buy stuff, it's usually has less to do with that your actual need, but who you want to be in the future, right? That's why everyone goes out and buys a gym membership, or they buy a tent because they want to be the person who camps, or the new running shoes, right? We're buying into something into the future that says, oh my gosh, like I want to be that person. And you get excited about it in advance. And, you know, you walk home from the store with the tent and it's like, oh my gosh, my family's going to go camping and we're going to have this awesome experience. It isn't about the tent. And I think a lot of businesses get stuck in like, it's about, I just need to sell this tent. No, the end user, right, is looking to use this to have experiences with their family. And that's the power of story. And then people say, you know, I want that tent. I want to be that I want that in my life. It's going to enhance it in some way. And in the second you can see yourself in it, then all of a sudden you really kind of want it. You know, it's like, oh, That's what I want.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I love that because I do think that, in the absence of that, the other especially inside of the company, the absence of that story, the inside of the company is gonna create their own story, which is, well, the business leaders just wanna make money. So I'm just here to clock in and clock out.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, I think also maybe on the other side of that question, what happens when there is no story? What happens in circumstances when, yeah, the story isn't created or it's not given, it's not developed.
hmm People make up their own story, and that is a kiss of death in organizations. When you have a bunch of people making up their own stories, and Brene talks about the story I tell myself isn't always the story that's true, and it can kind of be really negative too.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it is leaderships. It is a responsibility of leadership that isn't soft, that isn't fluffy. It is 100% essential that you get your story to your company. If you want people to come to work and do more than just punch in and say, oh, yeah, they just want to make more money.
Mhm.
And that's why there's a ton of turnover. It's hard
Right.
to keep people right now. And, the next best thing is going to come along, and I'm going to go over there because they're going to pay me a little bit more, or maybe they're going to give me a few more days of vacation. That is what happens, I think, when companies are really stuck in this is just what we do.
Mhm. Mhm. And for anybody listening who maybe isn't aware of Brene, who she just mentioned, Brene Brown, also a guiding light in my life. I adore her so much. Dare to Lead, her book is really, really good. Definitely recommend checking it out. But yeah, I heard her talk about that too. Like the story I tell myself, we use it in our relationship, like it's really powerful. It's really powerful in business. It's really powerful in personal relationships. And being aware of the fact that like people will create their own stories if you don't communicate yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I partnered with another organization, and there was this meeting that went on, and I stopped and I said, the story that I'm telling myself right now is that what I have to say is not valuable to you.
Mm.
And it was like, because it wasn't true. Right? What I had to say, I was just, and if I would have kept telling myself that, it could have really undermined the relationship.
Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, I love that you said that, people are meaning making machines. Like, I love using the example of like, if I said, all right, Ellen, will you come to the principal's office? It's like, what happens in your brain? Like, you just make up all sorts of stories. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. I did the thing. They're going to find me out, blah, blah, blah. Like, we just make up stories in the absence of information. Right. And I think we live in, they call this the gig economy, but I really think it's a connection economy. Like, I think people want to have a relationship, not only as employees working for employers or for businesses, or they want to have a relationship with who they buy from. Yeah. Right. Like, why am I buying this tent versus that tent? Well, this tent, is made by this company who I resonate with. Like, their company story makes sense to me.
Yep.
Where I see myself in that. I don't just see myself in the tent. I see myself in the company's story. Why Tom's Shoes was so successful, or some of these organizations that have a larger narrative at play, folks flock to it, right? Like, they can really see themselves in it. And I love that you said too, like, in the absence of story, I mean, we're in the political landscape right now, right? Like, we're not far from an election, which is miserable to listen to and be a part of. But, if you're a candidate and you're not telling your story, somebody else will.
Yes.
And they're gonna make up that story over and over and over again. So it's not just, do I have a story, but is it clean? Is it clear? Does it make sense? And is it on repeat?
Yes.
Do I say it everywhere all the time? And when you've done a lot of, like, we've mentioned, you've done a lot of fundraising work, you've done a lot of work with leadership teams. Like, how do you encourage kind of the continued use of a story, right? Like, you can create it, you can tell it once, and then what? Right? Like, what do you do with it? How do you keep it as part of, the flow? How do you keep it as part of just what you do on a regular basis?
There was an Aristotle who says, tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Like we think, oh, I don't want to keep repeating myself. But it is how we learn as humans. That's why schools are moving towards circular learning, right? That says in math class is going to kind of link into like what you're learning in history. That's going to link into, we need that repetition. We need spiral learning in order for it to sink. And David, I think it is more than just do the company story. It is about, why am I showing up every day for this? Like, I need a reminder too, that people come to work and they're leaving their families. I mean, a lot of us spend more time with our colleagues than, we do with our kids during the week. Mm-hmm. I have to believe that what I am doing matters. And that's part of that story, but also like, how does it change into different contexts? The story inside the organization is a little bit different than kind of the story to donors. Yeah. Right. How does the donor become the one that actions becomes the hero? Mm-hmm. No one wants to hear about Ellen's story about, this is, if I'm working with a company, like, I don't know this and I don't know, like, what I can do is help you get to where you want to be. I can tell a story that says, my job is to make you better, to make you more successful. So it's learning how to that interplay and where those stories make sense and remembering who your audience is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would be curious, that kind of sparked something in me, kind of back to your bio as well. You talked about being like a glass ceiling shatterer. Obviously love that. When it comes to doing this work and continuously telling these stories and creating these stories with your clients, I'd be curious to know what story, if you have one, you use to keep up your energy for it. Because I mean, every time I've encountered you, like, you have such a great presence. You're so clear, and you have such a leaning forward kind of energy. I would be curious to know kind of what story or what tips and tricks do you use, which I'm sure lots of business leaders can use to continue to fuel their pursuits and continue to, shatter those ceilings when they come across them.
That's a good question. The first thing that kind of comes to my mind is I've had a remarkable experiences in my life living in South Africa, traveling around the world with different causes. And my heart's been broken over and over again. And we see that in teams too, within cultures, with just pain. And with all of these experiences of, learning how to raise money, an experience of getting a team to rise above their challenges, to do something that was groundbreaking at the time in South Africa. My job, my call in this life right now at this stage in my career is to help all ships rise. Like, don't be stingy with this experience. Leave none of it. It's like a rag. Like, I don't want any of these experiences to be left in the rag. Like, wring it out. How do we make culture better? How do we help teams be better? How do we help nonprofits that are doing really good work do more of it? Right? How do we help those businesses that are also good for the planet, that are good for the employees? Like, let's help them. Let's use all that we have to make them grow. I think that's the story of, do not let my life experience go. Don't let a drop of it go unwasted.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, that's good stuff. Anything, I think we should maybe just take a breath right for a second. And anything you want to wrap up with? We often, would love to just have you share kind of what's buzzing in your world, what's working on, what are you working on? Where can people find you?
Yeah, we can find me at ellenchristine.me. One of the things I've been working on is working with past clients on case studies, because what people want to know is what challenges were people facing, what solutions, and what was the impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been having clients do case studies recently, and I think that's a great way to get my kind of see what it's like to work with me, not from me telling you what it's like, but for those who have worked with me. And the thing that I right now think a lot about is culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's how are you intentionally creating culture within your company, within your business, nonprofit, because companies who don't have that are at risk of not surviving.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of my time thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, good to know. Yeah, we'll make sure that in the show notes that links to your site and follow you on LinkedIn are available so people can connect with you and follow the work that you do. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. It's always good to see you and hear from you and from your experience. I mean, I've heard a little bit about some of it from Dave, but I'm glad to actually spend some time with you.
Yeah. This is great.
Well, I would imagine this won't be the last time that we have you.
I hope not.
So fun. Always fun to catch up. Always fun to be connected with you. We have such a fun history. We always kind of find our way back to working together somehow in some way. And I've always enjoyed and cherished those times. So thanks so much for dancing the dance with us. And I'm really looking forward to your new reality TV show where you go door to door and you say, do you want to dance? Because I really hope you knock on my door someday and I can show off my Midwestern Methodist dancing skills.
Oh boy.
All right.
Oh boy, it's great. Yeah,
this was a joy.
Yeah, thanks for
telling. Bye.
What a gem.
Yeah. What a gem. I know. And I just still, every time I've encountered her, I think her energy and her zest for what she does is just so inspiring.
Yeah.
I also think something in myself with things that I care about a lot and I want to see happen, I talk so fast about them. I feel like I lose people. And to what you said about one of her, her biggest strength is I feel like she communicates in such a story, digestible, paced, musical kind of way that to your point, I could just listen to her talk all day.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think she, to her credit, she also does the work of finding the examples and paying attention to the stories that articulate points, that has metaphors that make something come to life, right? Like, I think that is effort, right? It's kind of what we were asking at the outset of the conversation was, how do you help people do that, right? Like, it's work. Like, doing the dance, learning how to dance is work. It's not just like you naturally become a storyteller. Like, you actually have to define the story. You have to practice it in the mirror. You have to practice it with your, spouse, partner, friends, whatever it is, and then go tell some of your employees, and you keep that work going. So I do think there is effort to it. Story often sounds like this, whimsical thing. And it's like, well, it is. It adds whimsy to certain things, but it also is work. So, I hope you connect with Ellen and, kind of see some of the amazing things that she's up to. A very gifted storyteller, great friend. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for checking in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us on Business Velocity. Today's insights are just the beginning of enhancing your business's momentum. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to us right now. You can also check out the 5 Facets of Business at theevolveddifference.com. And remember, the time is now to take these strategies, apply your learning, and achieve velocity. We'll see you next time.